If you want to fail at your consulting business, the fastest way to do that is to estimate things wrong because you'll lose your shirt. Engineers tend to be really bad at making estimates. We look at a project and we think, oh, I can do that in a couple of weeks. It's always a couple of weeks, no matter what it is. It's like you've got a project that's, update these cells in the spreadsheet. Oh, it'll take me a couple of weeks. Send this rocket to the moon. It'll take a couple of weeks. That's a little bit in jest, but the fact is, it's really hard, and it's hard to estimate accurately. And it's hard for us to think beyond that couple-week horizon. We can envision doing a simple task. We can think of breaking it down into some pieces and thinking, it's not that hard or whatever. But if you are working for yourself, giving estimates to customers, and then doing that work and getting paid, it is extremely important to be able to estimate accurately. If you estimate too high, you're not going to get the job. If you estimate too low, but then it takes longer, you're going to overrun the project and you're never going to get the next job. And you might not get paid for that job, or there might be a lot of turmoil going through back and forth to get some equity for the amount that it took versus the amount that you estimated that it would take. There are two basic ways that we do work in the consulting world. One is fixed price, and one is time and materials. And that at first maybe looks like it's an easy solution to the problem, but no customer ever wants to go into a project that's open time and materials with no cap on it at all. So what you're going to have to do, even in that case, in most cases, is you're going to have to give an estimate of generally what the scope of the project is. And then you're going to work within that scope. And if that scope goes significantly over what you were predicting, or you're halfway through the project and you realize there's no chance of finishing this, then there's going to be a problem. It's very often difficult for customers to go back and ask for more money from their management for something that was supposed to be taken care of. And even though time and materials isn't necessarily a promise to complete something with a specific amount of money, at some level it kind of is, because it's the trust that you're building with your customer. And if they view you as someone who's inaccurate, or even worse, not honest in your estimates, that you're not going to be invited back. You're not going to build that long-term relationship with that customer, which is what you want to do in order to have some continuity of work as you build your business. So there are a couple of things that can be done to help mitigate that. One of the things that is very helpful is when you get a task, a project that has a decent scope to it, break it down into smaller pieces. I always use a tool that lets me think through all of the single line deliverables of what we have to do. Break the project into parts. We're going to have to read from a DAC card. We're going to have to write a log file. We're going to have to interface to a database. Whatever those things are, just break them down into as much resolution as you can, and then go back and estimate those individual pieces, and then add them all together. And inevitably, when you add those all together, it's going to be different than the estimate that you would have given to the entire project. It's generally going to be a lot more. Because once you've looked at the details, you realize there's a lot more to it. And as you dig in your mind into each of those details, you come up with a laundry list of additional things. Sometimes those break into subtasks and other things. Sometimes they just give you views in, oh yeah, there's this whole extra thing that we're going to have to account for. And it helps you get that down in paper and then put a number to it. And then let those numbers total up to what they need to be. Let the project tell you how big it is as much as possible. Of course, you can always be wrong about that on any particular thing, but if you've broken it down into a whole bunch of subtasks, being wrong on a subtask has a lot less effect than if you were wrong on the entire thing with just one swag at it. Another thing that can help is doing that estimate with someone else. Break that into pieces, and then each of you give an estimate and talk about why you think that's hard or easy, or middle of the road, whatever it is, and come to some agreement on an average or oh yeah, I see how that could be harder. I'll go with your estimate on that. Those kind of back and forths can be very helpful. You can also use a tool called Planning Poker, which is kind of a blind way of doing that, where you look at a task and each of you assigns a number to it without telling the other, and then you come back and you reveal that at the same time, and one of you says, oh, this is a 5-day thing, and one of you says it's a month. You're like, okay, that's something you need to talk about, and you hash through, because one of you might have a different view. One of you might say, oh, I can use this library and this is really easy to do. Another one might say, you haven't considered this. It opens up a can of worms over here if we have to do it this way. So those kind of perspectives can be very helpful in kind of bringing some reality to those estimates that we make. So that's a useful technique, is breaking that down into pieces for the purpose of estimating. Another thing, which is even more powerful than that because it hits right at the business side, is to break the project down with the customer into phases of the project that are more bite-sized. And it's very common if you go into a project from the beginning, you might think that it's a certain scope, but if you take a small investigative part of the beginning of the project, really dig into it, flesh it out as to how it's going to come together, you'll get a much different view of the entire scope of the project. And then if you move to the next phase, you go deeper and deeper and deeper into the implementation and the details. It's a great way of capturing things in smaller pieces and building trust with the customer with smaller projects, so that you don't have to just say, okay, here, sign on the dotted line for this enormous project, and then you get into it and things go sideways. You're just easing into it. It's much more comfortable, and it is a much more relaxed pace for easing into realizing the size and scope of the project. And when you do that, it also gives the customer the chance to give feedback that if you say, well, the project is grown because of the specification, they can dial that specification back if they have budget constraints that they need to contend with. They don't have the opportunity to do that if you're often doing this entire big implementation and then have to ask for money later. It's going to be too late to make adjustments. So staying in close contact with the customer during all of those phases, work on bite-sized phases of the project, and really, really important, if things go off track, if things look like they're going to take longer than you thought they were going to, you have to tell the customer immediately as those things start to go off track. You think you will be able to make it up, you almost are never able to make it up. And the best policy is to be honest and forthright about that, to show which way the project is bending if things go a little bit off the rails. And the customer can be part of that solution. Don't fear that. Just be honest about it and straightforward about that. Bring them bad news as fast as you can, because that's how you can make corrections together and get a project that still can be successful. Those are the things you can do to help mitigate the fact that we as engineers are really, really bad at estimating.